Alright everybody, welcome back. It is Marissa again, and we are going to fix yesterday's oopsie. So the first thing we're going to do actually is I'm going to show you how to sew in your ends, because I realized I have not done that even though I said that I would. So I use a metal tapestry needle that looks like this. You have the option to use a plastic crochet needle. I think they're called yarn needles. There's all kinds of different ones that you can use for this purpose, but what you do need to make sure is that the eye of the needle is nice and big so that you have plenty of space to get your yarn through. So again, like I showed you yesterday, this is the sample that I had worked up, and this is the start of our blanket, so it's not really a sample. So what we're going to do is, because I have sewn this first end, this was our starting tail here, I've sewn that in around our magic circle. I'm actually not going to weave that end, I'm just going to snip it. So if you do that where you hold it as you're doing your magic circle, this now has 12 stitches laid over the top of it, so I'm not worried about that coming loose. I've never had one come loose when I do it that way. So the next end I'm going to start with is this one here. So what we're going to do is we are going to work our yarn into the needle and come back almost to the end, but leave a little bit folded over. And what I'm going to do is, you're just going to kind of work this up into your stitch, working it under and into as many stitches as you can to hide the yarn. So if you go in a straight line, chances are that it will eventually come loose. But if you work it into a couple of different stitches, so you can see I'm working it down and under, and then coming back up and through. I'm working it through these stitches here. That gives it a much more secure hold. To my knowledge, in all of the years that I have been crocheting, I have never had an end come loose when I sew it in like this. So this is just a little bit of advice. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sew in these ends on the start of our blanket, and I will probably do this after each probably 5 or 6 rows. I will just sew this in, and you can see I'm going, if I've got white tail, I'm sewing it into the whites. If I've got a pink tail, I'm sewing it into the pinks and things like that, just because that will help hide that. So if I decide to sew white into the pinks, I can hide it, but it's a little bit more difficult to do, which makes sense. So I'm just going to go up and down into several different stitches here, and don't be afraid to move off of the row or anything like that, and just be careful when you snip that you don't cut your actual work piece there. So that's how you sew in ends. So I'll go back here in a little while and I will sew those in. Now, I want to talk to you about a couple of other things that I have in here. So some of you got, I think it was Dearly, got a really excellent kit, and it had these in there. And they basically are plastic safety pin, diaper pin looking things. These are called stitch markers. You don't have to have these, but if you do have them, they're very handy. And so what we'll do is I will show you how I used these when I first started making granny squares. I would put these in the corners to help mark where my corners were, to make it a little bit easier to see that. I love using my stitch markers. A lot of times I will use them, especially on my very large projects. I don't tend to use them on my smaller ones. But if you need to mark something like a beginning when you're crocheting in the round, I always use the stitch marker. Or on different things where I just need to make a note of where I am in the pattern, I will do that as well. So that's a stitch marker. You can get them like this. They've got ones that are kind of like curly cues, and you kind of just wind them in and different things like that. And then you'll notice in my little container, I also have a bunch of these poppy clips. They're hair clips, and these came from Dollar Tree. And I actually use these if I have to stop in the middle of a row and mark where I'm at. So like when I go to my crochet groups or things like that, I will use these. And what I'll do is when I pull the hook out of my loop, I will put this through the loop and then attach the loop and everything else to the project like that. And this doesn't affect the yarn in any way, but it keeps your end in place to where you don't lose your working loop and your work doesn't accidentally get frogged while it's being transported, or when you set it aside, you know, in the evenings when you're done working on it. So I use those. So I have a whole thing of those in there. And like I said, these came from Dollar Tree, and I think they come like 8 in a pack. I've got a good old safety pin, a couple of safety pins in here that I've also used as stitch markers or place markers or different things like that. And then one of my embroidery needles is in here for some reason. So, and this also came from Dollar Tree. It's magnetic. So most of the time this stays on my refrigerator because I just don't have a lot of magnetic surfaces in my house. So I usually keep this on my refrigerator, and then I always know where it's at. But if you have one of those like metal craft carts or something, this would be good for that, because then you can just stick it on the side and it holds everything in there. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to go back to my white yarn, because that was our starting color. And I'm basically just going to start the pattern over to show you how to do these rows. And once we get to the third row, that's pretty much the way that it's going to go. So the first and second row have something a little bit different, the way that you do them. And then once you get to the third row, that's pretty much the repeating pattern for the entire rest of the blanket. So what we're going to do, again, we're going to chain 5. I'm going to just completely redo it from yesterday as well. Then you're going to go in to the very first chain stitch there. Pull up a loop and then slip stitch that loop through your one that was on your hook. So there's your magic circle. And I'm just going to hold my finger in there, and I'm going to weave this yarn in as we go. So you're going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3. Then we're going to do 2 more double crochets straight into the center of this magic circle. So go double crochet is yarn over, insert your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. We're going to do another one. And so that right there is your first, we call this a cluster. So when you do the same stitch in the same space and you do it multiple times, that's called a cluster. And so this is a cluster of 3 double crochets. So this first one, even though that's technically a chain, that counts as your first double crochet. That gets your work up to the level, the height that you need to be able to match it with these other ones. That's why you chain up in projects. So if we were doing a single crochet, we would only chain up 1. If we're doing a half double, you chain up 2. If you're doing a double, you chain up 3. If you're doing a triple, you chain up 4. You guys kind of see where this is going? So that gets you up to the height to make it match with your actual stitches, your actual double crochet stitches there. That's why we do that. And then it also acts as a double crochet. So then we're going to make a corner, and to make a corner, we're going to chain 3. So there's 1, 2, 3. This space that we've just created is going to be your corner. Now from here, you are going to yarn over, and you're going to do another cluster of 3 double crochets to make the second side. So there's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. Okay, so there's your first side, there's your second side. We're making a square, so we have to make another corner. So a corner is chain 3, and you can chain 2 here. If you don't want your corner to be quite this big, you can chain 2, that's fine as well. Then you're going to do your 3 double crochet cluster. There's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. Then we're ready for the corner. So that's 1, 2, 3 chains. And then we're going to make our last side. Now if you get to this point and you notice that your stitches are kind of close together, just kind of scooch them back along your magic circle and you can open up a space there. So I just put my fingers down here where the stitches meet and just kind of pull them over to the side. So there's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. Okay, so there we go. We've done that. Now we have to create our last corner. So you've got a corner here, and a corner here. This is not a corner. That's your first chain stitch, so don't get confused there. So what you're going to do is you're going to chain 3. And then to connect it and make it a square into the top of this into the top of this turning chain, you're going to count up 1, 2, 3, and you're going to slip stitch into that third chain, that third space at the top there. So there's the first, there's the second, there's the third. So you're going to go in there, you're going to pull a loop and pull it straight through the loop that was on your hook. And that will create your 4 corners and your 4 sides. That's exactly what we did yesterday. Okay, so you now have 4 corners and 4 sides, 4 clusters with a corner in between. All right, so now the next thing you're going to do to make your second row, and we're staying with the same color, is you're going to chain up 3. 1, 2, 3. All right, now starting on this row, to be able to make sure that your work doesn't get pulled too tight, we're going to chain 1 anytime that you're going over the top of a cluster. So I've chained up 3. That's going to serve just like this one did as a double crochet, but I also have to chain 1 more. So I'm going to chain 4 technically. So that's 3 for your double crochet and 1 to go over your chain space. Okay, and that will come evident why we did that here in a minute, because you've got to make a space there. Then we're going to do 3 double crochets into your corner. There's 1, 2, and 3. And guys, if I'm going too fast for you, don't forget that you can slow down the speed of this video, and you can also stop it and rewind it if I'm going too fast, okay? So do that as many times. That's exactly what I did when I was learning, is I would stop the videos, I would rewind them, I would watch it again, and do those things that I needed to do. So starting on this row, every time that you do a corner now, you're going to have a cluster of 3 double crochets. We're going to chain 2 for our corner, and then we're going to do another cluster in that same corner of another 3 double crochets. Okay, there's 2 and 3. So on your second row and each subsequent row, this is what your corners will look like. So you basically are creating a side, your chain is creating the corner, and then you've got to create a side over here. All right, and that all happens in that one space. On the next row, that will happen in this space as well. So now we're going to go over the top of a cluster, and you remember when I said we go over the top of a cluster, we're going to chain 1 to make a space, and then we're going to do 3 double crochets, our chain 2 for our corner, and another 3 double crochets, all in this space right here. So there's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. we're going to chain 2, or if you want the bigger space, you can chain 3 as well. I like to chain 2. And then we're going to do another 3 cluster. This probably sounds like gibberish at the moment. I promise by the time you're done, you'll be able to do this in your sleep. Okay, there's another cluster. So when we go over the top of a cluster on the sides, we're going to chain 1, and then we're going to create another corner. So that's a 3 double crochet cluster, 1, 2, and 3, and then you're going to chain 2. And then do another cluster. There's 1, 2, and 3. Chain 1 and do your last corner. Okay, now when we do our last corner, we have to remember that this is going to count as a double crochet. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a 3 double crochet cluster. So there's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. We're going to do our chain 2. Now the only time this happens is on this very last corner, because this is going to count as a double crochet right here, our original starting chain. We are on this row, our starting chain. We only need to put another 2 double crochets on this last cluster. So do 2 here, there's 1, and there's 2, then to finish this row, and to make this part of the cluster, again, you're going to go into the top of that turning chain, the 3rd chain up, which is right here, and you're going to slip stitch. Okay, and that makes that a cluster just like it did down here. So there we go. That is our 2nd row. So I'll let you see. And the more rows that you do, the more this is going to square up. So you can see the difference here. It still looks like a little bit rounded on the edges. But then if you look at our big pattern here, you can see it's squared up much easier, and it's a little bit easier to see. So the further that you go on this, the easier it is. So you can see we've done our first 2 rows. So this is 1 row, this is 2 rows, and we're going to do 1 more row of white before our first color change. Okay, so right here, if you'll notice, each row that you add, you're going to add another space on each side. Okay, so this is our 2nd row, and we have 1 space right here on the side, and then we have our 4 corners. One thing that you can do, if it makes it easier, is to take your stitch markers, if you have them. You can use, guys, I've used a bobby pin to do this before, to make a stitch marker. So you can use a bobby pin, you can use a piece of yarn, anything that will denote that that is a corner. This is what I did when I very first started crocheting, and the very first granny square project that I did, I put a stitch marker in each corner to make sure that I recognized that was a corner. Because I can look at this now and know exactly where I am, but when I first started, I could not do that. Okay, so you can see they just sit in your work, no big deal. So those are my 4 corners. So what I'm going to do is, this row is going to change just a little bit, and this is how we will do every one from now on. Okay, so I'm going to chain up 1, 2, 3. And then into this space right here, I've got to create a chain 3 cluster. So I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to take my hook straight down into this space. And I'm going to do 2 more double crochets to make my cluster. Some people do that differently. They continue the way we did it here, but I like the way that this looks a little bit better. It doesn't look like it's so different. So like you can see, like you've got a little bit of gapping there, which is fine. I don't like the way this looks when you continue the project, so I do mine this way. So I chain up 3 to start my row, and then I go ahead and put my other 2 crochets in here to where the last row we finished up back at that chain 3. So we're going to do that. We're going to go over a cluster right here. So we're going to chain 1, and then we're going to make a corner just like we did the previous row. So to make a corner, that's a cluster of 3. There's 2 and 3, chain 2, and do another cluster of 3. Now I work right over the top of my stitch markers because I can pull them out without any problems. If you don't like that, you can, and what a lot of people will do is they've just made that corner. So this is no longer a corner. What they'll do is they'll go ahead and move their stitch marker. So if you want to use stitch markers and you want to do that, now you know that's the corner. Okay, so it's a cluster of 3, chain 2, cluster of 3, just like we did this row. Now we're on the second side. We're going to go over the top of a cluster, so we're going to chain 1. And then here in this spot, anytime you have a spot like this, you're going to do a cluster. So that's a side, so it's just 1 cluster of 3. 2 and 3. Okay, chain 1, and then make your corner. I'm going to take these out now so that you guys can see how that works. So there's 1, 2, and 3, chain 2, and 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so there's another corner. So if you want to put your stitch marker back in, there you go. Chain 1 over a cluster, and then you've got to fill this spot in here on your side. There's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. Chain 1, make a corner. And again, guys, I know I'm going super fast, so if you need to slow it down or stop it, go at your own speed. It's taken me 6, 7 years, something like that, to be quite that fast, and I'm really not even going that quickly. So this is what we're looking at so far. We're going to do our last side here. So that's a chain 1 over your cluster, and then 3 into the space, chain 1 over your cluster, and then make a corner. And guys, this is literally what you're going to be doing for the rest of the blanket. So the only other thing is basically your color changes. That's 3, chain 2, so once you get this down, you're going to be able to fly through this project, I think. Okay, so there we go. We have finished our last corner. So again, we've got to finish the row, which means there's a cluster there. So we've got to chain 1, just like we would on any other one, and then we're going to go into the top of that chain 3 space, just like we've done, and slip stitch it in. Do we see how that works? So following our pattern, we've now got 3 rows of the white. So what we're going to do at this point is what I like to do when I change color. Every time I change color is I tie off the project. I tie off this color completely and start with a new color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the loop through and out just a little bit, just like that. I just slip stitched, and then I'm going to snip this in the loop, and then I'm going to pull out my working end and then pull this tail and make it nice and tight. Don't pull too tight because you'll break your yarn, but do make it snug. Okay, I don't think we need those anymore. You can kind of see where your corners are. You just got to pay attention there. If you still need them, continue to use them. Okay, so I went ahead and pulled that out there. So what I'm going to do, what a lot of people don't do, is you can do one of two things. When we start our next color, you can start right here where you ended that one. You can chain up, crochet, or chain up 4. So that's 3 and then 1. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to start our colors. So I think yesterday in that video, I talked about color A, B, C, and D. So pink, obviously, is my B color. So you guys can see I'm still following this exact pattern. So if I lay this on top, my next row needs to be pink. So I'm going to show you how to do the next row. It's exactly like the previous one, except we're going to do it in pink. So we're going to make our slip knot. Okay. And instead of starting here where I finished, I'm actually going straight over here into this space. Okay, I inserted my hook and then I put on my yarn. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this up around that chain, and I'm going to slip stitch just one. Okay, and then I'm going to chain up 2 and 3. So there's my chain 3. And when I slip stitched around that, it basically made a knot in there. So it moves, but it will be secure. And then I'm going to do just like I did down here. I'm just going to do 2 more double crochets into this space. Maybe. There's 1 and 2. And just like that, I've created my first cluster of 3 in the pink. After this, we're going to literally follow the pattern going around. So we're going to chain 1, make a corner. Goodness, I cannot get my hands to work tonight. There's 2 and 3. Okay, so there's our first corner. So you're going to chain 1. Now remember when I told you back here, each row you're going to add another space on your side. So now we have 2 spaces that we're going to do. So just like normal, we're going to chain 1 over that, do a cluster of 3 in this space, chain 1 over that, and do another cluster of 3 in this space. And as you can see, what that creates, so once we get our other corner over here, you're going to have 3 spaces on this side now. So we're going to make a corner. Oop. Okay, so now you can see the next row, instead of having 2 spaces, you're going to have 3 spaces to work into. And the row after that, you'll have 4, and so on and so forth. So as you get bigger, this is how your blanket gets bigger. So instead of expanding like top to bottom and growing this way, this one grows outwards from the center. And that's one of the things that I like about this blanket. So there's a cluster, chain 1, cluster here into that space, chain 1, and a corner. And guys, don't get discouraged if you, like I said, if you can't go this fast or whatever. It's taken me all these years to build this up. And honestly, me and the double crochet are like BFFs. Almost every single project that I've done has predominantly used the double crochet stitch. So this is one of those stitches I can pretty much do in my sleep. I can watch TV while I'm doing this one and just tell whether it feels wrong. And if you use one stitch like that often enough, you'll be able to do that too. So I know it looks like I'm going like supersonic speed here, and you know, I used to get discouraged by that when I first started, as they would go so fast. And I figured out that it's just a familiarity. Remember, I talked about that muscle memory all the time. This is complete and total muscle memory. If you're in the group, if you're in my crochet group, I posted most of my previous projects, not all of them, but most of them, the ones that I have pictures of. And pretty much all of them have double crochet as the predominant stitch, even though it's done in different ways. So there's the ending of that row there. Don't worry about it if your ends curl in like this, okay? Because as you go, that will flatten out. So what I would do here to follow our pattern is you're going to do 3 rows of color A, 1 row of color B, and then 1 row of color A. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie this off here, and then I'm going to go back in and do 1 more row of color A, which is the white. Then you're going to switch back to color B, and you're going to do 3 rows of color B. 1 row of color C, 1 more row of color B. Then you're going to do 3 rows of color C, 1 of color D, 1 of color C. Does that make sense? So this is how our pattern is going to go. So if you can't follow that, don't freak out, because what I'm planning to do is, for our Tuesday tutorials, is I'm planning to literally make this with you guys and work on it on Tuesdays with you, so that you can see how I'm changing colors, how I'm doing all of those things, and we'll turn it into kind of like a whip and chat. So you can see I'm exactly where I was on this one. So there's our row. So you're going to do 1 row of color B here on the outside of the pink, and then this is my first of 3 rows of the pink here. And once we get past color D, we're going to just cycle it back around. So this is what I mean by the interlocking colors. So you've kind of got a sneak peek of what color is going to come up, finish it off, and then you're going to do 3 rows, so the block of color B, and then you'll sneak peek your block of C, and so on and so forth. So we'll keep going like that. But next week, instead of it being tutorial style, we will be able to do more of like a whip and chat type style for the video. So again, you guys, I couldn't believe that it had stopped recording. I did get quite a few phone calls yesterday. I was very popular yesterday. So that's the only thing I can think, is that it maybe cut off when I got a notification or something. So today we have it on Do Not Disturb so that I could film this for you. There's a couple, I mean, you guys, you've probably seen this. This is a basic granny square. You could literally finish off with this. You can do a different color every single row. You can make them solid colors. You can do all kinds of things with this. If you wanted to make 100 of these, you could literally make a blanket out of 100 of these. So what we're going to do is we're going to be following this pattern, and we're basically doing a giant granny square. So some people would call this like a never-ending granny. And we're just going to keep increasing row after row and just make it bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's basically what our blanket is going to consist of. I don't worry about these holes so much. I've always wanted to line a blanket, a crocheted blanket with fabric. So we may try that. I may do that with this blanket for Miss Amelia. That's my new grandniece's name. Her name will be Amelia Grace. So I may end up lining this with that, but a lot of the parents actually like these because then the baby doesn't overheat, and it's one that can be used all year long. So that's completely up to you. If you use a smaller hook size and a lighter weight yarn, so like if you got baby yarn and it calls for like a G hook, your spaces are not going to be this big. Okay, so there'll be smaller spaces. They'll still be there. They just won't be quite so predominant like these are. And this will relax a little bit. The more that you kind of get to it, it seems kind of stiff now, but it will relax the more you work with this yarn and hold it and handle it. It will relax and get softer as you go. So you can see both sides. You can tell this is your off side, but not in a bad way. And then here's your front side. Okay, so I hope everybody's enjoying this. You guys go get your yarn if you want to crochet along with us. Even the experienced crocheters can crochet along with this. And we'll probably add on, I'll judge it kind of how my day has gone and how long my shoulder and things hold up, but we'll probably do at least 2 or 3 rows each whip and chat. Now once the blanket gets fairly large, that's a lot more work than you think it is, because this doesn't seem like a lot, but as your row suddenly becomes 4 feet long, that's a whole different thing. I don't think we're going to make it that big. We're probably going to make this one about 45 by 45 inches. That's about a standard baby blanket size. So you can see, let me grab my, excuse me. If we're making it 45 by 45, you guys, we're just about 8.5 inches so far. So we got a ways to go. But we will keep going, and we'll go through all of the colors at least once. And at that point, that may be a 45 by 45. Either way, I hope you guys are enjoying this. I hope that you are making your baby blanket. I am so excited to see, what color combinations everybody chooses. I really hope that you guys, choose some different color combos that you want to use that fit you or whoever you're making this for, that, fit your house colors or however. But I'm hoping that somebody will do some different colors. I look forward to seeing it. I'm sure you guys will do different yarns as well. I know not everybody has a Joann's. So you can do this with whatever yarn that you want to do this with. I just love this Big Twist brand for baby blankets. That's completely up to you, but I look forward to seeing y'all's projects. So even if you're not on my Facebook group, please post it in some of the, like Mrs. Crochet and Coffee. I know you can post it in their group, and some of those different ones, or you can send it to me in an email. I do have my email on my About Me section. So you can send it to me there as well. And I'm on Instagram also. And all of that is in the description box below. So guys, until I see you next week, I think on Friday, we're going to come back and we are actually going to make a deco mesh wreath with ribbon for the summer. So that'll be something a little bit different. I am going to be traveling again this weekend. So I won't be able to probably do a whip and chat. I really need to do one. I haven't done one since I think like the very beginning, and I feel really bad about that. But things have kind of ramped up. I'll talk about that a little bit more next week. Some of the things that have been going on, all good stuff so far. And so, I will get a whip and chat out soon. I'm working on it. I've tried a couple of times and it just didn't work out. So either way, this is the start of our interlocking color interlocking granny square blanket, if I can get all that out. So go ahead and gather your yarn. If you want to get up to this point, this is the point that I'm going to start at next week. So I won't work on this again until I see you guys next week. So this is where we will start. So if you could get your yarn and try to get up to this point, then this is where we will be when we start next Tuesday, and we will probably get through colors B and C more than likely. Okay, so again, remember guys, you don't have to be perfect. You just got to try things, and sometimes you fail, and that's okay. So until I see you again, everyone be safe, be blessed, and have a good time. Bye.